Hello, everybody. Today is December 6th, 2023. It is a Wednesday. You are joined by me, Lewis. It's been a long time since I've been on here on Status Coup, so good to see everybody again. Seeing some familiar faces in the chat. Love to see folks. Chris, how are you doing? Henry, Denise, thanks for joining, everybody. For those of you who are just joining right now, please smash the like button to help get this stream out to more folks. It helps out tremendously with the algorithm. We're going to be covering a whole lot today in this show. We are going to start off first with the kind of breaking news that came out of Ryan Grimm's new book that was just released yesterday regarding AIPAC actually offering AOC $100,000 back in 2018, just after she won her primary run. We'll get into some of the details there. We're also going to talk a bit about something that hasn't really made much attention, especially in left-leaning media at all, is what's actually going on the southern border at the moment. Definitely something I've been interested. Haven't had time to really do much digging, but I spent a good chunk of time the last few days looking into it. So we'll bring the latest there, and actually what Republicans and Democrats are trying to grapple with right now in Congress, as far as the GOP presently trying to condition any more aid to Ukraine with spending on a bill on the border. We'll get into the details there. Apparently, there was a very heated exchange in the Senate. It was not on video, but a few reporters were in the room. We're going to read through a thread of one of them who was there to kind of go through it. Definitely interesting to dig into all that, as well as more just absolutely abysmal polling for President Biden, as he had an interesting comment at a private fundraiser in the last few days, saying that he's only running because Trump is, like he's going to be some savior and can somehow win this thing. I don't know if he's looking at the same poll numbers as you and I, or just getting the general sentiment of anybody, but that would be interesting to dive into nonetheless. Again, for those of you just joining, please press the like button. I have had 2 cups of coffee in a very short period of time here, so we're going to just jump right into it. Going to be an interesting show for sure. But starting off, like I said, with the latest coming out of Ryan Grimm's new book. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up the Huffington Post article here. And as Colin pulls that up, just to set the scene, again, like I mentioned, June 2018, AOC, upsets to win her primary in the state of New York. She, Israel, Palestine, the conflict there wasn't something she had spoken a ton about up until that point in her primary. But she ends up doing an interview, and that's where things start to get a bit interesting. So headline on this article: top pro-Israel group offered Ocasio-Cortez $100,000 in campaign cash per new book. We're going to scroll down a little bit, Colin, into the article here, and we're going to start off with Grimm, who was the Washington bureau chief for The Intercept, has earned his stripes as the Beltway's resident AOCologist, is the first to report that Ocasio-Cortez's spokesperson at the time, Corbin Trent, received a call during that trip from someone who identified himself as a representative of AIPAC in New York. The person said he could raise $100,000 for Ocasio-Cortez's campaign in short order, with more to come, as a gesture of goodwill that, quote, might start the conversation about how her views on Israel. Ocasio-Cortez had already done an interview with Margaret Hoover on PBS's Firing Line, in which she conceded that while she opposes Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, she was, quote, not the expert on the topic. Here's a bit of an excerpt from the book. While in Kansas, the campaign got its first taste of what Washington was going to be like. A representative of AIPAC called Corbin Trent and told him that there was $100,000 ready to be handed over to start the conversation. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I didn't realize that fully went over, but Huffington Post did follow up with Trent, who confirmed his memory of what had occurred. Quote, the implication was that her positions could be repaired with conversations, that her positions were based on a lack of information and a lack of proximity to enough variety of people, Trent recalled. But Ocasio-Cortez saw AIPAC as one of the special interests whose influence she had run to diminish. And by that time, she was already on her way to being an online fundraising powerhouse, thanks to her grassroots appeal. Chakrabarti, who would become the lawmaker's chief of staff, likewise confirmed memory when Trent brought this up. AIPAC, though, conveniently denies to Huffington Post that any of this occurred at all. The article does go on It does explain a little bit too later on down that they all could be telling the truth here because at the time, AIPAC wasn't necessarily a fundraising arm like it is today. They were more so focused on education on the topic here, and that it could have been people associated with AIPAC, yada, yada, yada. Do with that what you will. But seemingly pretty clear that something along these lines did occur back in 2018. And you know what? Good on AOC for recognizing, like, yep, this is exactly the kind of thing that we are trying to get away from, not lean more into. But as we saw back in 2022, AIPAC really started to ramp up the fundraising. And then most recently with Slate coming out. And actually, before we get to the Slate article, the interview that was referenced in the Huffington Post piece, I went back and checked out some of it. You know, she gave some very like kind of traditional, like light pushback against Israel in them. Didn't say anything too crazy one way or the other, but when she was really pressed on the issue, that's when she kind of said, like, look, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. And that is maybe why AIPAC felt like they could get in there and help make her become an expert on the topic, but with their framing in place. So just an interesting little tidbit on that. You can go find that interview if you're interested. Otherwise, though, reporting in the last couple of weeks from Slate kind of revealed what AIPAC's plan is moving forward and kind of how AOC turning down that money back in 2018, you know, the rise of the squad and this group of people who have been vocally against the Israeli government in particular. Again, there's a lot of conflating of trying to make it be, if you're criticizing Israel at all, you're anti-Semitic, yada, yada, yada. Obviously, that is not the case with these folks. They're making that clear. But it has turned into, Colin, we can go ahead and pull up that Slate article, actually. The headline on that, the squad is about to fight for its political life. Basically, the article kind of goes through, I'm not going to go ahead and read it all, but and points out that AIPAC is going to be putting way more money than they've ever put before, millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars into primarying and or trying to defeat in general elections, specifically members of the squad, some members of the Progressive Caucus. And we're already starting to see that begin to bear out in reality. Most recently with Jamal Bowman. I believe this is just from 2 days ago, Colin. We can go ahead and pull up the Axios piece here. And let's see, mine's got an ad on it. Rep Jamal Bowman gets Democratic primary challenger. A prominent local Democrat on Monday filed to challenge Rep Jamal Bowman for his seat in 2024, potentially setting up one of the most closely watched Democratic primaries in the country. I'm just going to kind of skim through a little bit of this here, but George Latimer is the one who is going to be running against him. He's 70 years old. He served as a city councilman as well as a state legislator before defeating a Republican incumbent to become the Westchester executive in 2017. He's never lost an election in 3 decades. I don't know much about this character, but definitely reeks of establishment, probably can get some money. And if you've got AIPAC behind you and you're willing, you know, AIPAC's willing to spend the kind of money that they're talking about, this is definitely going to be an interesting one to at least keep an eye on here as this happens. And this is really just an early one. We also have in here further down on the article, Colin, you don't need to pull it back up again, but Summer Lee is facing a challenge from a local congresswoman or councilwoman as well. We'll see how much money AIPAC puts into that as well. So it'll be interesting to kind of take a look at these members of the squad, which ones of them are going to have issues and which ones might not. You know, a lot of these folks, to their credit, have become very good at grassroots fundraising. Now, I wish that they would, you know, hold their vote back and use their power of voting in a block together better more often than they do, because they basically don't. Imagine, I've said this before when we were talking about Speaker of the House votes or things that the Freedom Caucus had done in the past. Imagine if the squad and other members of the Progressive Caucus and others on the left in general held their votes together in a block like those on the right did, and imagine what could have been done. Even just in the last 2 years, imagine what could have been done. That's not what happens most of the time, unfortunately, but nonetheless, this is where we are. Closer to home for me in the state of Texas, another member who I think he falls in. I'm actually not even sure if he's technically like in the squad or not, but Greg Casar is his first term in the U.S. House, represents Texas 35. He is actually trying to get ahead of this because there was rumblings of AIPAC trying to have a challenger against him as well. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up the tweet from Congressman Casar. He actually was getting ahead of this by doing polling on the topic. He tweets hot off the press. First Texas polling on Israel-Hamas conflict reveals 80% of Texas 35 Democratic voters support calls for a ceasefire and long-term peace in the area. He continues to say Democratic primary voters in Texas 35 district like and support Casar and are overwhelmingly likely to vote for his reelection. These voters support a ceasefire and are more likely to support a candidate like Casar who calls for one. I dug into the poll a couple weeks ago when it came out, and it was overwhelming. He really doesn't have a shot at being primaried by an AIPAC candidate, in my viewpoint. He is very hated amongst the more this small contingent of more conservative voters in the Austin and San Antonio areas, mostly Austin though, because he formerly was an Austin city councilman. But amongst the more left-leaning folks in the greater Austin area, San Antonio area, Greg Casar is going to have no issue there. So interesting, though, to see Casar even, he's not going to just go do this poll for no reason. There was obviously concern when AIPAC's making this announcement that, he and many of his colleagues were going to have to at least pay attention to see what the heck is going on here, because they are going to be spending just so much more money than they have in the past on this topic. But I'm definitely interested to check out more of the book. I'm actually blanking on the title of the book. Brian Grimm's book it just came out yesterday. It ended up being very timely with all of the news around Israel and Palestine in the last couple months here. That wasn't necessarily time. I'm sure he wrote that book a year ago with the time it takes to get all this stuff together. Jordan could tell you better than me about how long that takes. I know he's been working hard on his book at the moment, but definitely something that we'll be checking out moving forward. Next up, though, and for those of you just joining right now, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. We got almost 150 people watching. We can get that up there for sure. And we're gonna move on in a second here, though, to what's going on down at the border. And we don't talk about this a ton here on Status Coup. I actually don't see a lot about it in independent media at all, with the exception of the far right kind of online media. Fox News loves to talk about this. Newsmax loves to talk about this. And it makes sense because, to me, it is one of Biden's biggest issues that I just don't see any real action on. In the last couple of days, I've been following a local reporter based in Tucson, Arizona, who's been down on the border and just kind of keeping an eye on what's been going on there. I also follow several of these conservative folks who definitely put a hefty bit of spin on what they're talking about. But it's important to see what is actually going on there, because I don't really see much as far as more left-leaning media covering this at all. So let's just take a look at the numbers first. And Colin, I think first we can pull up the Customs and Border Patrol numbers directly, but on here we can see over time here, the increases, and this isn't a pretty graph. We're going to look at a pretty graph in a second. But in 2023, U.S. Border Patrol total encounters up over 2 million. Last year, it was also over 2 million. The year before, 1.6. And before that, you were talking in lower hundreds of thousands for the most part. Colin, though, let's go ahead and pull up the New York Times article, and there's some better graphics in there that can help folks visualize this a little bit more. Really, the first graph right at the top of that article is going to be much easier to look at for folks. And if not, while you try to pull that up, I'll read off some of it. So 2023, again, 2.05 million, 2022, 2.21 million, 2021, 1.6 million. And on this graph, it basically just drops straight off. The number more than quadrupled after 2020. And that's a trend moving back even before that. It's kind of not to draw a clear line from Biden becoming president, because there's a lot that went on during this time frame with the pandemic and with Title 42 and all of this sort of stuff. But there is a pretty clear line of the Biden administration taking over and border crossings going through the roof, frankly. There we go. There's that graph. And you can just see how dramatic the increase is. And these are folks, these are apprehensions in between the legal crossings on the border, So these aren't folks crossing at a legal crossing. You can scroll down a little bit, Colin, and you can actually see where the next graphic, where Title 42 was authorized and then when it expired. Okay, we might. It's okay. You don't need to pull it up.
It's making us pay for it. Yeah.
Yeah. You're good. One other thing I'll highlight in the article here is it shows the difference over time of where these folks are coming from as well. It's just more so interesting to see, when you look back to 2008, 2010, 2012. Primarily folks from Mexico. In 2012, it starts to favor more towards folks in the Northern Triangle countries. That's Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. But in the last 2 to 3 years, it's actually 49% in 2023. 49% of people who've crossed the border are not from Mexico. They're not from Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador. They're from other countries in different parts of the world. So I think that that's interesting to be at least keeping an eye on and looking at. It's not just folks coming over from Mexico and countries that are close by. Yesterday alone, literally 12,000 encounters with Border Patrol. These are not small numbers. And in all of those figures that we looked at right there, those were apprehensions in between the border. There's roughly 1.7 million known gotaways. A known gotaway is someone who, Border Patrol might have been trying to apprehend and couldn't because there's too many people at once. 1.7 million known gotaways in the last 2.5 years. So again, these are not small numbers. I'm somebody who, I think we need to absolutely allow for asylum seekers. We need to make the process easier for folks who almost just want to become citizens, but we need to know who is actually coming in. It doesn't make sense to just essentially allow folks to come in and not know they are. Some of you might disagree with that. I'm not sure, but the system we're doing right now is clearly not working. The folks who do end up getting apprehended, the number who get deported back is not even remotely clear. You can't look at number, like Customs and Border Patrol does not release the amount of people who are told, yep, you get to come into the United States, you get a court date at this certain time, or the people who were just immediately sent back either to Mexico or to whatever country they had come from initially. You don't get to see that exact number. So, when I say there's 2 million people this year, it's not that there were 2 million people who were all let go into the United States, but a portion of that group was. And those are generally going to be people who at least seemingly could apply for asylum here. The issue for those people then becomes, okay, now you need to go to immigration court. Colin, let's go ahead and pull up it's a Spectrum. It's a local news article, actually. This is in this article, they speak with a couple different migrants, as well as House Representative Henry Cuellar from down in South Texas. And in the article, we can scroll down a little bit. It says here, I'm going to read just a portion of it. As for migrants, waits to get a court date vary. In New York, ICE told asylum seekers this month to return in March 2033. That is literally 10 years away. U.S. Rep. Henry Cuellar, a Texas Democrat, said at a recent hearing in 9 other cities, San Antonio, Miramar, Florida, Los Angeles, Jacksonville, Florida, Milwaukee, Chicago, Washington, Denver, New Jersey, others, the wait is until March 2027. That's better, but that is still not good. We're talking 4 years for these folks to get a court case. Until then, though, migrants in question won't even get an initial court appearance on the books, though they can live and work in the United States. After that, their case will work its way through U.S. immigration courts, a process that will take about 4 years amid a backlog that reached 2.1 million cases in January, up about 600,000 in 2017. So this is an insane amount of people in a backlog. And just so you know, this article is from this year. It's from earlier this year. This is an insane amount of folks who not only might have to wait up to 10 years just to get their initial court date, but then once that process starts, it's going to take 4 years for it to happen. So, and in the meantime, number one, for them, in many cases, imagine you've been living in the United States for, let's not use the 10-year example because that's probably the extreme. You've been living in the United States for 6 years, let's say. You probably don't even, you definitely don't have a home to go back to where you were. You don't have an apartment to go back to where you came from. You're working in the United States. If you have kids, your kids are going to school in the United States. You now start your court date, and let's say they go to send you back. What are you going to do in that situation? And I know it's like, a lot of people are going to be like, that shouldn't be our concern. They're the ones who came here. They made the decision to run away from whatever they're yada, yada. Just out of human decency level, like, why is nobody talking about speeding up these court trials, all the rest? And also, like, that's not a way to process people and to figure it out over time. There has to be a better way here. I just couldn't get over the fact of how backlogged this is. I'm going to get into the specifics of that when I talk a little bit about what the heck is going on and actually how this is being tied into Ukraine funding at this time, the border crisis at this point. It's all sorts of interesting, but let's take a look in general. Colin, we can skip the backlog cases one just because I kind of skimmed over that already, but let's take a look in general. I mentioned that I've been kind of keeping an eye on a local journalist from Tucson, Arizona. Adam Klepp is his name. He's been just kind of posting some clips from on the ground there. First off, you can just pull up the first video, Colin. It's the port of entry in Lukeville, Arizona, which is a really small border town in very rural Arizona, has actually had to close to deal with the surge of migrants. This just gives you an idea of what their port crossing looks like right now. So that's just to give you a glimpse of that is normally a crossing where vehicles can go back and forth. He's done some interviews with business owners, like small business owners, people who run a little general store on the Arizona side of the border. All of the truck traffic is gone. The town is dead at this point. But what's much worse than that is the amount of people who are now stuck not at that port of entry. That's where they get to go after they get through the first step. The amount of people who are essentially just stuck standing along the fence in the middle of nowhere, in many cases with like given no food and water for up to 4 or 5 days in a lot of cases. This is a clip. There's kind of there was another clip before this too. I had to kind of narrow it down where he shows first a section of people who are traveling and who have kids who are rightfully being who are rightfully being expedited through to go faster so that kids are not stuck waiting in the more kind of horrendous conditions. But folks who are traveling adults have been out there for days on end. Colin, we can go ahead and play the next clip.
Ecuador, ¿cuántos días llevan aquí?
5 días sin comer. Sin comer, sin
Y comida, agua.
Agua simple. Comida nomás uno se lo deja. Una galleta que te dan nada más. Manzana, una manzana. A latinos no lo están llevando. Mucho frío. A latinos no lo llevan, a latinos. Solamente llevan más a los morenos, a los negros. A latinos no lo están llevando para nada. 6 grados.
¿A dónde van los Estados Unidos?
Sí.
¿A dónde va? Boston?
Sí, Boston. Charlotte.
Chicago?
Boston.
And
Wisconsin.
they're all gathering around me here. No comida, no agua. ¿Cuántos días? 4.
No, hambre, no comida. Friki-taki con pollo.
Mucho frío cayendo.
Lo que queremos que Estados Unidos nos dé una oportunidad de trabajo para todos los latinos, porque nuestro país está un desastre, no hay trabajo, hay desocupación, es por eso que inmigramos. Todos los latinos queremos ir a trabajar honradamente.
Le prometemos ser unos buenos ciudadanos.
Colin, that's good for now.
Les prometemos a todos.
you can hear a lot of the folks are pleading for, they're saying it's cold out there. They're not being given food and water. Some of them had been out there for 4 days. I actually went and looked back at a couple different series of videos from this journalist and some others. And you actually do see the same individuals in many cases being interviewed in that same exact spot multiple days apart. It's hard to get a grasp of how many people are standing there in this just because this is one group. At one point that this reporter for the local Tucson station was saying one of the days there was over 1,000 people standing there, definitely hundreds every single day. And this is in a very remote part of Arizona. It's actually inside of a national monument. So it's essentially like a national park. And these folks are stuck out there. I saw a tweet just before this went live. There's trash piling up. There's no bathroom out there. There's not even a porta potty. And again, you've got hundreds, thousands of people passing through here over multiple days. No bathrooms. A lot of them are seemingly sleeping out there in the cold if they've been there for 4 days because there are no facilities here. Not great. And it's leading to potentially dangerous situations at the border, not only for the migrants, for Border Patrol, for the local community. People are getting rightfully agitated and potential, almost fights breaking out. Colin, you can go ahead and play the next clip. I don't know what it is, but that last clip to me feels like Middle Ages treatment of people, basically. I mean, again, just knowing that many of these folks had been out there for days on end, lined up, not being provided food and aid, people, yelling. There's in some of the other interviews that were on here, there's fights, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Not a way to treat anybody. And so much of this could be prevented with at least like clarity on what the hell the laws are and what the rules are and who gets sent where. And maybe you get people to stay back or being able to have a border, whatever it may be. Definitely not great to see what's going on down there. And right now what's happening is something interesting. So in the Senate right now, this is yesterday, and they actually may be voting on something today as this is happening. So Colin, if you end up seeing any news about a Senate vote happening and very likely failing, let me know. But yesterday there was a really interesting briefing that occurred, we'll say, after what was meant to be like a briefing on the Israel-Ukraine funding related bill that they're trying to get through because, let's send billions of more dollars around the world to fight wars and kill a bunch of innocent people left and right. Let's do that, but let's not worry about things going on here at all. That would be ridiculous. Sense my disdain with that at this point in time. But anyway, the briefing that went a little bit off the rails. The GOP members started talking about how they're only going to pass any of this Ukraine aid with the condition of having this border bill that they put together back in May of this year and passed it through the House on the table as well. Apparently, in this little scuffle, Chuck Schumer offered a GOP vote on the floor for both the Ukraine bill with the border bill together, knowing that it would fail. And then this kind of skirmish happened. It unfortunately, there's not video of this. I wish there was video of this. But I'm going to read through a tweet thread from she's a PBS reporter who reports on stuff happening in the Capitol. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up this thread here because I thought it was pretty interesting and also shows how little of a chance this sort of thing might happen. Colin, it should be a tweet thread actually from Lisa D. I don't know. There you go. So Okay, I have a lot of reporting on the, what is the right word, unusual explosive briefing that happened in the U.S. Senate on Ukraine and the border. First, the room briefing. Top officials, some of the most important military and diplomatic personnel in the world. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General C.Q. Brown, USAID Deputy Administrator Isabel Coleman. Then senators of both parties. Early on, Senator McConnell tells the group something along the lines of, quote, "No one supports Ukraine more than me, but we have to talk about the U.S. border." He turns it over to Senator James Lankford, R. Oklahoma, who makes his best pitch for the GOP plan. Schumer would later say McConnell, quote, "hijacked the meeting." After Lankford speaks, composed, not tense about the border, Schumer then seemed to feel the need to respond to the GOP pitch. Schumer said, essentially, "We are not here to talk about the border. We're here for Ukraine." Then several Republicans, including Romney, shouted and stood irate at the idea that the border was off the table for discussion or questions. Senator Kramer asked Joint Chiefs of Staff's Chair Brown, essentially, quote, "Don't you think we need to be doing this to secure the border?" Brown answered essentially, and I'm told straightforwardly, that this is not his job. Then a senator, mixed reporting on who it was, asked the Joint Chiefs chairman, "Have you ever been to the border?" The General Brown said he is from Texas. The senator then asks him if he was born in Texas. Turns out he was born in Texas. Among those incensed and shouting was Senator Lindsey Graham, who at one point, this reporter is told, shouted something along the lines of, "Can we fucking get someone in here who knows anything?" Senators also shouted at Schumer, "Ask your mayor," pointing to the migrant issues in New York City. At one point, a senator said to Secretary of State Blinken, "You need to tell this to the president. You need to make him understand where Republicans are and how furious they are about the border." So definitely seems like things went a bit off the rails there. I'm surprised I haven't seen more about this meeting. I always mess up her last name, but Lisa Desjardins, I'm not even sure. She always has a interesting connections in the Capitol. I actually started following her on January 6th when she was live streaming in the building when it happened. She just happened to be in a very peculiar place as it was going on, but it's turned out she's a great reporter in the Capitol, and whenever there's big votes, I always tend to take a look at what she's doing. But interesting that that she's at least getting the full account of what went on in there. Speaker of the House now, Johnson, actually came out and is kind of talking about where he stands on all of this right now. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up his tweet from Speaker of the House Johnson. And in that, he says, the Biden administration has failed to substantively address any of my conference's legitimate concerns about the lack of a clear strategy in Ukraine, a path to resolving the conflict, or a plan for adequately ensuring accountability for aid provided by American taxpayers. Meanwhile, the administration is continually ignoring the catastrophe at our own border. House Republicans have resolved that any national security supplemental package must begin with our own border. We believe both issues can be agreed upon if Senate Democrats and the White House will negotiate reasonably. So the new Speaker of the House really kind of laying that out there. I would imagine at this point, he's probably not going to want to bend very much, just given that he is fairly new to the position. Mitch McConnell also kind of saying that he would encourage Republicans not to vote for any aid unless it was conditioned in the same way of having some sort of tie-in to the House Republicans' bill on the border. What is in that bill about the border, you might ask? I'll get into it in just a second, but for the over 200 of you watching right now, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. It helps us out quite a bit in the algorithm, and if you're seeing us for the first time and you're liking what you're seeing, please hit the subscribe button down below. It is an easy way to help support the channel. But what is in that GOP bill? Colin, we can go ahead and pull this up, and I'm going to kind of skim through a little bit of this. This is like a kind of an analysis of what was included in it. I'll read the top, and then we'll kind of just go through the headlines here. So, and this was passed back in May, basically. So, in practice, this bill would severely restrict the right to seek asylum in the U.S., curtail other existing lawful pathways, place unnecessary pressure on border communities, intensify labor shortages faced by small businesses and essential industries, establish new criminal penalties, and make other significant changes to U.S. immigration law. I'm going to go through a couple of the points here. So, it would restart border wall construction. and defund NGOs, non-governmental organizations that provide services to migrants. So a couple things on this. Number one, President Biden actually, he kind of seemingly was reluctant about it, but did restart some border wall construction. This might be unpopular here. I don't know. I'm not necessarily against all border wall construction. I do think that there are areas of the border that it probably makes sense to have a wall, but you're just seeing so many places where it doesn't matter. Like when you're doing the ones where it's just these metal bollards up the middle, there's countless videos that you can go find online now of, a couple minutes with an angle grinder. It's now swings right open, and Border Patrol tries to go around and welding them shut, and it doesn't really do anything. There's a lot of areas where, even the Texas border communities don't want a wall because it's in the middle of a beautiful park. It's on the Rio Grande River. It's, wherever it might be. There are areas where, sensitive wildlife and whatnot, but there are definitely areas where a reasonable wall could make sense. So that's something that maybe when we talk about compromising a little bit could be there. Issue here that I'm seeing right off the bat, though, is defunding any NGOs that provide services to migrants. That's going to be a major red flag because a lot of these NGOs are the ones who are actually feeding, housing, offering transportation to the folks who have made it through the first step of getting the essentially like issued a court date, whether it be 5 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever it may be. If you're lucky, maybe 3 years from now. So these NGOs, for the most part, because Border Patrol is swamped, they don't have the housing facilities for all of these people, obviously. They're the ones who are getting these people spread out. So if you defund these NGOs who are taking care of that right now, all of these people will be able to get essentially nowhere outside of the border towns themselves. That one town that I showed you some clips from earlier, that's a very tiny town. I don't know the exact population, but we're talking low thousands of people, maybe. They don't even have, they don't have the resources for that at all. So many towns along the border here in Texas, whether it be, Eagle Pass or wherever it may be, they don't have the resources for it. So it would take all of the burden and put it on these border towns that have been dealing with this forever in the first place. So again, not a great situation there. The number 2 point, this would significantly limit asylum in the United States. It changes some of the wording of how it could go. When I read through it, it's really unclear. Unfortunately, like trying to prove an asylum case when it's stuff going on in another country is already, fairly difficult to make it happen. So it does make some changes there. A couple different other things to it. I won't get into the weeds, but essentially there are a couple elements to this, including, making it more difficult for folks who aren't families, all sorts of things like that a lot of Democrats are not on board with at the moment. But again, what is missing from this legislation? What is missing with it? I've said this like 3 times at this point. There's no talk about the immigration courts being fixed, expanded, increased of any kind. Nothing. Apparently, backlogs of up to 10 years, the system with the GOP's bill to try to fix this. That's unacceptable to me. Are they going to potentially compromise on that? I'm not really sure. Another thing that's not included in here. What do you do with existing undocumented folks who are in the United States already? What is the plan for them? Are you going to deport all of them? Because I don't see that happening. Number one, that'd be a lot of people to need to deal with. And number two, frankly, a lot of these folks are making sure that you have food on your table because they're working in agriculture across the United States. A lot of them are working in construction across the United States. And if those people disappeared, there would be major supply chain issues, labor shortages, all sorts of things going on in that regard. So I think you'd want to be very careful what you do there. I think you can make some sort of plan. I'm not saying we need to make these people citizens overnight, but you can make some sort of long-term plan. But you can't do that, though, until you do have some sort of actual knowing who's coming in and out of the country. So there's a lot of layers to this issue. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So that's something that's missing. And the last thing, I touched on this a little bit, but how will these border towns deal with thousands and thousands of people coming into their town every week if the NGOs are now all defunded, who are currently taking care, in a lot of cases, of housing, of food, of all of these different things? that Border Patrol can't deal with right now because they don't have the resources to do it. What happens then? That is not being addressed in this bill. That, again, the GOP says is the only way they're gonna pass more aid to Ukraine is through this. They need to also pass the border thing. They're being tied together one and one. So definitely interesting to see the differences there. This is also, so what kind of compromises can happen? Colin, I'm going to skip through a little bit of this just for time's sake, but what kind of compromises can happen here? At one point, the White House tried to kind of get some help at the border. They did a $4 billion request for more funds to Department of Homeland Security. Colin, you can go ahead and pull up the fact sheet for it. It would include more agents. That's something the GOP wants is more agents included in the request there. I mentioned before, the potential agreements for maybe adding some funding for wall construction where it makes sense, although that's going to be a hard one for President Biden to get on board with when, again, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about the Republican primary when we look at new polling numbers and whatnot coming out at the end of this, but it's going to be hard for him to push border spending when, he can't at the moment because that was Trump's thing, even though he wasn't able to get it done. But that's besides the point. Issue on immigration courts. Maybe there's some work you could do there to find some compromise, but I'm not sure because, maybe the reason that that's not being done is Republicans in some cases don't want these folks to be able to come over. They want to limit the amount of immigration that can be happening. So I'll be curious to see what ultimately happens there as far as can you increase these immigration courts. That seems like a no-brainer to me. I think it seems like a no-brainer to all of you that would make a lot of sense to do that. But it's not right now. Again, 10-year backlog in some cases is not even close to appropriate. There was a thing, and I won't pull it all the way up just because it's a little bit old, but I do want to highlight the fact that Status Coup has actually covered some of this on our own on the ground. At one point, a list of U.S. mayors all actually asked the Biden administration for help in dealing with this crisis because so many of these people have been bused, as you've seen, or flown to sanctuary cities across the United States, including New York City, Houston, Chicago, all sorts of places. And because that's where there is resources to take care of these folks. And those cities have had a hard time over the summer and again recently at dealing with the major influx. Our own John Farina actually interviewed some folks in New York City, some migrants there. Colin, we can go ahead and just play the first minute or so of some of Status Coup's coverage of that from over the summer or the fall.
People, they are coming from the Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico City. In Mexico City, they will take bus to go in the border. In the border, they will pay all $400, all of them to enter in the border.
$400 to get into the United States border?
Border. And in the border, it depends on the immigration. You can stay 2 days or 3 days, they will let you left in outside. And if you didn't have address, you must be to come to New York City to looking for the help or the ventilation.
So again, that was from a couple months back. John Farina actually speaking with folks who were outside of the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City. And that scene is playing out in New York and other cities across the country still today. And at this point in time, and I see Chris Garrett, John Farina is a one-man crew. John is a legend. I agree. He gets out there and covers all sorts of crazy stuff for us out there. Yeah, wild. So that just gives you a little bit of a glimpse. I mean, it's not an easy thing to solve. Don't get me wrong. It's also not popular for Democrats to talk about for the most part. When you look at the polling on who people trust on the border, the Democrats are nowhere close to the Republicans on this. The Republicans don't have it right either, though, as I just pointed out. Their kind of bill that they put together for this, that they passed through the House in May, is missing some pretty clearly, as I laid them out here, pretty clearly big issues, from immigration courts to the NGO issue with what's going to happen. What do you do with people who are already in the United States? Those things are currently unaddressed in their legislation. One thing I'm not upset about, to be totally honest, I really just don't love the idea of continuing to just send blank checks to Ukraine and soon Israel, funding war overseas in places that really don't affect, what's happening in our day-to-day here. Just really shouldn't be a priority. So the fact that they're holding that kind of spending back, not the worst thing. Again, to go back to the beginning of this when I said I wish that AOC and the squad would do that sort of stuff for more issues on the left. This is just another example of that. We'll see if the Republicans continue to hold the line on this and what ends up happening. But might be another tricky situation as we move forward for Biden going into 2024 on the election front and on the polling front, which is not great. And that's a smooth transition into our next section here, which is what the hell is going on with 2024 at the moment. There was some interesting news yesterday from Biden. But before we get into that, please, for the almost 200 of you still watching, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. It helps tremendously. Also, you have thoughts that you want me to read by the end of the show, I do read all of the super chats. Super chats are greatly appreciated. And you can also consider becoming a Status Coup member to ensure that we can continue to cover things on the ground, like that clip of John that I provided. StatusCoup.com/join is the place to do that. It makes a huge difference. Literally join for as low as $5 to $10 a month. So that would be super helpful as we move forward here. So earlier this week, President Biden, who knows if he meant to say this on purpose? I don't know. Probably not. Unfortunately, there's not video of this, but he said, and I quote, "If Trump wasn't running, I'm not sure I'd be running." Interesting. Essentially saying like he thinks he's the one who has the best shot of beating President Trump at this point. The only thing I'll say that he has going for him is that he did it once, but the sentiment of so many things, whether it be Israel-Palestine, whether it be inflation and the economy, whether it be him just getting even more old and having more gaffes and whatnot, the border, you name it. It's just really not there. He was then later asked about it by a reporter as I think he was getting off a plane or helicopter or something. Colin, we can go ahead and play the clip of him being asked about that quote later on.
Would you be running for president if Trump wasn't running?
I expect so, but look, he is running, and I have to run.
Would you drop out if Trump runs out?
No. Not now.
So that last question there, kind of hard to hear just because of the plane or whatever. She says, will you drop out if Trump drops out? He says no. Definitely interesting. I don't know in what world he thinks he's the only one who would beat Trump. I would argue that you basically take any like fairly normie Democrat who is not 85 years old, and they would likely be polling better. I don't know. Not great. I'm seeing some funny jokes in the comments here. I appreciate them. Not a great situation. And when you look at this, especially in the states that it really matters, the swing states, I covered one of these a couple weeks ago where we looked at swing state polling. It was like a three-way race between Biden, Trump, and RFK Jr., and then also with just Biden and Trump. And they were horrific. And you know what? Here's another round of them, and they are still pretty horrific. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up the first one, the general election swing state polling. Not a great sign for President Biden at this point in time. You've got, apologies here. There we go. You've got in Pennsylvania, it's Trump 44, Biden 37, RFK Jr. 7. So that is Trump plus 7. And I do like that these include RFK in these. No Cornel West in this. There should be Cornel West in this, but at least we're getting one of the third-party candidates included, just because there are 100% going to be independent candidates in this, whether it be RFK, Jill Stein, Cornel West, you're going to see third-party candidates, and at least some of it is represented. Again, I would like to see Cornel West in this. I would like to see Jill Stein in this as well. But regardless, I think when you add both of those people in there, that's going to pull from Biden even more potentially, or you're going to get more turnout for them. We'll see. I don't know. It was not great either. Is Kennedy when you look at the polls, Kennedy kind of pulls from Trump more in a lot of cases. So this is not good. So again, Trump +7 in Pennsylvania, Trump +7 in Arizona, RFK getting 10% in Arizona, actually. The border stuff that we talked about earlier, that's not going to be helping Biden in Arizona, that's for sure. Georgia, Trump +10, 45, 35-7. In Florida, again, Trump +10. North Carolina, Trump +9. And in Michigan, Trump +1. I'll be curious in time here as well to see the Michigan numbers and how they change over time. There is a large population in Michigan from Arab countries who are not happy about the way that Biden is handling the situation in the Middle East at this point. I forget the name of the group that they're kind of starting, but it's basically like we're abandoning Biden. We're not voting for Biden again. And that is a group of people who were definitely voting for him for the most part back in 2020. So that'll be interesting to see in the state of Michigan. The fact that Trump's up at all, though, not good for Biden at this point in time. We'll move on here to the just looking at it at a national level, the popular vote, essentially. Obviously, the popular vote is not how these are decided. But Trump is literally up in the popular vote at this point by 6 points. Trump 42, Biden 36. This one does include both RFK and Cornel West. So RFK at 12%, Cornel West at 3%. Definitely notable. I'll be very curious to see if we end up getting at least RFK in some of these debates, because 15% is the threshold. He's had a couple above it. I don't know when they choose those polls, but not looking good for Biden in the general. And this one is, obviously the Democratic primary, especially when you've got states like Florida, which I believe Jordan or somebody covered earlier in the week, essentially just not holding a primary election or only having one name on the ballot. I'm not naive to think that Joe Biden's not going to win the Democratic primary, but let's just look at the Democratic primary polling. You actually have Marianne Williamson at 13%. That's huge. Dean Phillips at 8%. I mean, combined, they're at 21% of the vote. And neither of them, Dean Phillips wildly gets like the media coverage now, occasionally at least. Marianne Williamson, though, she won't get any media coverage. And the media coverage she does get is very unfavorable for the most part. So wild to see 21% of Democrats, in a Democratic primary poll saying they don't want to support the sitting president. If you looked at numbers of Trump Republican primary in 2020, the challengers that he had never got more than 1%. Never more than 1%, maybe 2% in 2020. Obviously, vastly different when you've got 20 times the amount of support for other candidates than Trump had against his in that primary. So definitely not a sign of a strong president who is definitely, no matter what, going to be the guy to beat Trump. And that's why he's running. The only reason he's running is because Trump's running, right? Wild. Let's take a look for a second, too, on the other side of this, on the Republican primaries. So the Republicans, I know you're all very excited about it, have a debate going on tonight. I know you've probably, had it set in your calendar for months, and you've been waiting for the most enthralling debate of your life for a primary that we know exactly where it's going to go. But let's take a look at what's going on in that. This is the just national standing. You still got Trump at nearly 60%. He's plus 40 over DeSantis. Nikki Haley actually having a little bit of a bump. She's been kind of in some of these polls been above DeSantis even. Vivek Ramaswamy has kind of petered out quite a bit, and everybody else, below 2%. Not great for anyone unless your name is Donald Trump on that one. And then let's take a look at just, comparing the two first states here, Iowa and New Hampshire. So when you look at Iowa, you've got again, Trump, this one's a little bit closer-ish. Trump at 45. He's up 23 points over DeSantis, who's at 22. Nikki Haley here, though, 19%. I mean, if you're Nikki Haley, you're happy that you're trending in the right direction. Not a fan, obviously. She's a major war hawk and has all sorts of issues. But yeah, not great unless you're anyone but Trump. And given the fact that this is the Iowa caucuses, if you don't get, I believe it's 5% of the vote in a lot of these places, you kind of have to choose your second choice. You're going to see a lot of the, like, Vivek Ramaswamy is very likely going to be on the edge in a lot of these places of whether he gets 5% or not. If he doesn't, you're going to bet that those people are basically all going for Trump. He's kind of a very Trumpy candidate in here. So that helps Trump, hurts DeSantis, hurts Haley. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. Chris Christie, though, also might be in the same boat, and that will maybe help DeSantis and Haley. So it could negate, and you still have Trump plus 23. So not even necessarily worth. And Michael, who isn't a war hawk on that list, LOL. I tend to agree with you there. The only one, maybe, I mean, he's got plenty of other issues, but as far as war hawks on this, Vivek Ramaswamy less so than the others, but he's got a million other issues with him. But yes, that is mostly a list of some pretty serious war hawks for sure. And then lastly, Republican primary in New Hampshire, where I'm actually from. Just looking at it, this is a 538 kind of over time here. Trump up by quite a bit. And actually Nikki Haley, though, is running in second place here. But I mean, having lived in New Hampshire for several years, I don't live there now, but it is Trump country. I mean, there's no way that it goes to anybody but Trump. And yeah, I mean, voting is 2 months away in New Hampshire and in Iowa, literally 2 months away for Republican primary voting, which is freaking wild. It's wild. That's in my head. It just realized that, wow, the Iowa caucus is coming up. So definitely going to be an interesting one to see. But we went through a lot today. Definitely quite a bit going on. I'm very curious to see over the next week or so. We're definitely not going to see anything today, I don't think, except for a vote that doesn't go through. But I'm very interested to see what happens as far as Ukraine and Israel spending, as well as how that pertains to the border. I really do think that something needs to be done at the southern border that especially deals with the backlog of court cases, but really just make sure that we don't have a major humanitarian crisis of a shit ton of freezing cold people on the southern border this month and next month, like happened last year around this time, where, it might be the southern border, but in southern Texas and Arizona in December and January, it's not abnormal to have temps really drop like a rock at night. And if you have these folks on the border wall sleeping like you do right now in Lukeville, Arizona, in other parts of the border for 4 nights on end, you will literally have dead bodies along the border, people dying of hypothermia along the border, because we can't process people fast enough, because our laws and regulations are so unclear, because it changes every other month, Title 42, Title 8, blah, 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 blah. These people, who are trying to come across and trying to better their lives, better their situations, so many of them are coming from a really desperate place. And if they see a glimmer of hope, of course, they're going to try to make the journey. It makes a lot of sense. So if we want to get this into a place where, we can still welcome people, but not have a major humanitarian crisis of people dying along the border in the cold and trekking through deserts and mountains and jungles and paying human traffickers and, the cartels and all sorts of horrible, horrible stuff, then we should care to do something about this. I would like to see something happen, but I'm absolutely, like I said, not holding my breath, but it's going to reach a boiling point of some sort soon here. So I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see how it goes, but I am going to wrap this up here, though. Thank you all so much for joining me. It was a good show. It's been a while. I don't think I've been on here for about a month almost. So it's good to see everybody again. And we'll see everybody soon. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good night.